So this is the traffic committee for the City of Mission Viejo for Friday, May 14th, 2021. This is an opportunity for members of the community to address various traffic and transportation related items with two members of the city's Planning and Transportation Commission. We can go ahead and start with some staff introductions, and then we'll have our commissioners introduce themselves, and then we'll be running off to the agenda after that. My name is Brett Kennedy. I'm the transportation analyst for the City of Mission Viejo.
Hi, my name is Philip Natoyama. I'm the city traffic engineer for Mission Viejo.
And I'm Rich Schlesinger, the city engineer for the City of Mission Viejo.
Okay, commissioners, it's your turn.
Sorry, Peter. Yeah, saw that. Sorry, Peter Molinari, Planning and Transportation Commission.
Okay.
Andrew Quino, Planning and Transportation Commissioner.
All right.
Deputy Wayne Dixon.
And you're with?
Mission Viejo Police Services.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So we have just a few items on our agenda today. The first of which is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. So those were made available online to you. I hope you had a chance to review them. And if everything is okay, we can move for approval.
So moved.
Okay.
Second that.
All right. Now, I'm going to have to jump over to my copy of the agenda here to see what's next, and that is the Pacific Hills HOA yield sign requests at 4 intersections and road stencils at 2 roadway locations. This item is going to be presented by Philip, so I'm sure he is preparing to share his screen and provide his staff presentation.
All right. Sharing my screen now. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah. It looks good, but maybe you could zoom in a little bit.
All right. How's that?
Better.
Okay. All right, so city staff received a letter from the Pacific Hills Homeowners Association on April 1st, and they had several requests for yield signs at 4 intersections and requests to consider 25-mile-per-hour road stencils on a couple of streets. Let's see here. The board is requesting for this these locations due to received numerous safety concerns with regard to near collisions due to vehicles maneuvering these intersections at high speeds, drivers not acknowledging oncoming traffic or yielding to pedestrians, or limited visibility. There are 4 locations where they're asking for a yield sign. That's the intersection 1, which is Ramani Drive and Alado Drive. Intersection 2, Ramani Drive and Arcata. Intersection 3 is Morrow Drive and Pacific Crest Drive. Intersection 4 is Pacific Heights and Pacific Hills Drive. And then in addition to that, they're asking for 25-mile-per-hour road stencils on Ramani Drive and Pacific Hills Drive. So for the second part that's requesting for the road stencils, I did respond back to the HOA and inform them that the city is transitioning away from road stencils and replacing them with signage instead. And that's due to the maintenance effort. The road stencils, we have to repaint them every 18 months. So there's a cost to the city, whereas if you install a sign, it'll last forever until somebody knocks it down or the sign fades, and that takes a few years. So I did inform the HOA about that. As part of their letter, they did send us some graphics, and this is, I believe it's intersection 1, which is Alado Drive. They're requesting for a yield sign coming out of this residential street. This is a second photo they provided for Arcata Drive and Ramani. Again, they're requesting for a yield sign coming out of this residential street. And then this is Morrow Drive. When you're coming out of the residential street, it's uncontrolled, and they're requesting a yield sign here. And then this is the last intersection, which is Pacific Hills and Pacific Heights Drive. They're asking for a yield sign here. So that's what the letter consisted of. So city staff created a location map. This is a location near Newhart Middle School. There's La Paz Road and Pacific Hills Road where you enter. And then Pacific Hills Drive does a zigzag around their community and exits out of Oso Parkway. So on this particular map, you can see location 1 and location 2. It's on Ramani Drive, which is just southeast of Pacific Hills Drive. There's the 2 other locations, location 3 and location 4, which is Morrow Drive and Pacific Crest Drive, and Pacific Heights Drive and Pacific Hills Drive. Location 3 and 4, this similar exact same request has been presented to the traffic committee twice in the past, and the traffic committee has denied it twice in the past, in 2018 and 2019. And I'll provide the meeting minutes for those 2 later on in an exhibit. And then also there's requests for 25-mile-per-hour stencils on Pacific Hills Drive and Ramani Drive. So I'll go over that a little bit later as well. So this is the first intersection. This is a new request. We'll call this location 1. This is when you're exiting out of Ramani Drive and you're intersecting with Alado Drive. As you can see on this exhibit, it's a residential to residential street intersection. So that's assumed low volume, low speed roadway. They are asking for a yield sign coming out of Ramani. So I made some markings where the yield sign would go and the yield pavement markings. Additionally, we drew some intersection sight distance lines. You're supposed to be able to see 390 feet based on our standard plan. When you're coming out of Ramani, you look to your left, you see a cul-de-sac. So you can only see so far. And then if you look to your right, you get to, I forgot what street that was, but the visibility does not reach 390 because of the end of the roadway. We also looked at the reported collisions for the past 3 years, and there were 0 reported collisions at this intersection. So that's location 1. This is location 2. This is coming out of Ramani Drive on the opposite end, and it's intersecting with Arcata. Again, I made some markings on where the sign and the striping would go. And then the orange lines is the sight distance visibility. For a residential and residential intersection, you're supposed to see 390 feet. You look to your right, you can only see about 100 feet down because there's a cul-de-sac there. You look to your left, you can see about 100 feet down because it's the end of the road, which is a pre-code. There were 0 reported collisions at this intersection as well for the past 3 years, which is 2018 to 2020. So that's the second location. And this is location 3. This is Pacific Heights Drive and Pacific Hills Drive. They want a yield sign coming out of Pacific Heights Drive. I drew the intersection sight distance lines on there. And you're supposed to be able to see 390 feet. And you do see 390 feet in both directions. When you're looking to your left, there is some landscaping there that could be trimmed to be able to see a little bit better. There's also 0 reported collisions at this intersection from 2018 to 2020. And then this location, again, it was denied twice by the traffic committee back in 2018 and 2019. That's location 3. This is location 4. This is Morrow Drive and Pacific Crest Drive. They were asking for yield signs coming out of Morrow Drive. I drew the site distance line. You could see 390 feet in both directions. When you look to your right, though, it's on the inside of a horizontal curve. There's a slight site distance impairment there. And then again, this location 4 was denied twice in February 2018 and February 2019 traffic committee. So that's the aerial view. Now these are street view photos. This is location 1 when you're coming out of Ramani and Alado. As you can see, there's houses on both sides, houses across the street. It's a residential to residential intersection. These 2 photos on the bottom, when you're looking to your left on Ramani and Alado, you could see there's a cul-de-sac to the left. You look to your right, to the end of the roadway. That was location 1. This is location 2. This is Ramani and Arcata. Again, residential homes on both sides, homes across the intersection. And then when you look to your left on Ramani and Arcata, it's the end of the road. It's Aprico at the end. If you look to your right, the bottom right photo, that's the end of the cul-de-sac on the opposite side. So that's what you could see when you're driving. Location 3, this is the intersection of Morrow Drive and Pacific Crest. This is when you're exiting out of Morrow Drive. They're asking for a yield sign here. I took a picture of the bottom left is when you look to your left on Pacific Crest, you could see all the way down. When you look to your right, this is where the site distance concern is, where I was referencing. You could see there's some landscaping there, and then the road disappears into the landscaping because of the curvature of the roadway. Again, this is an intersection that was previously denied twice at 2 prior traffic committee meetings. And then this next intersection is location 4. This is Pacific Heights Drive and Pacific Hills Drive. When you're exiting out of Pacific Heights, they're asking for a yield sign here. There's residential houses on both sides, residential homes across the intersection. When you look to the left of this intersection, there is some landscaping that could be trimmed to improve the visibility. And then if you look to your right, you can see all the way down almost to Oso Parkway. So that's good visibility on the right. So that's the end of the street view photos. This traffic committee meeting minutes is in regards to February 2019. This indicates that Pacific Heights Drive and Pacific Hills Drive, that's one of the intersections, and Morrow Drive at Pacific Crest Drive was both presented here, and it was not approved. The reason for that was that the traffic committee did not feel that it was necessary to install yield signs on local residential streets, and noted that Merino Drive and Pacific Hills Drive are both collector streets. There was one intersection that was approved at this time. The committee directed staff to install a yield sign and pavement marking on Merino and Pacific Hills Drive. So that particular traffic committee made a criteria to approve yield signs when there's a collector and collector intersection. They excluded putting yield signs when it's a residential street involved. That was the meeting minutes for 2019. And then for 2018, again, here's the meeting minutes. Staff, there were several intersections that were reviewed, and included in those intersections was location 3 and 4 for this current request. Staff noted that the original request was for stop signs, but none of the intersections satisfied the technical volume warrant for a minor street stop sign. Staff also discussed site distance at various intersections, noting that only 2 locations had visual obstructions, which is Pacific Terrace Drive at Pacific Hills, South Ridge Drive at Pacific Hills. The committee directed staff to send a letter to the homeowners association to trim the landscaping and improve the site distance visibility. Residents spoke in support of installing yield signs in lieu of stop signs, stating that motorists drive through the neighborhood in an unsafe manner. The committee directed staff to install yield signs and pavement markings on several intersections. So that was the request for 2018. And then this last exhibit, I'm going to try to address the request for 25-mile-per-hour stencils. So Pacific Hills Drive, it changes as the street goes on. A part of the street is a collector, where when you're coming off of Pacific Hills Drive off of La Paz, it's a collector and it has an existing speed limit of 30 miles per hour. So there are existing 30-mile-per-hour speed limit signs on this portion of Pacific Hills Drive. So that's not eligible for 25-mile-per-hour stencil because it's a engineering speed survey of 30. As you keep going down Pacific Hills Drive, from Pacific Hills Drive and Marino to Pacific Hills Drive and Pacific Heights, it changes to a local street. So that portion of Pacific Hills Drive is eligible for the 25-mile-per-hour stencils. However, we have not installed the stencils because we're transitioning to signage only. And there are 2 existing 25-mile-per-hour speed limit signs on Pacific Hills Drive along the residential portion. And then at the end of Pacific Hills Drive, after Pacific Heights, when you're going down Pacific Hills Drive to Oso Parkway, again, that portion is collector, and there are posted 30-mile-per-hour speed limit signs. So which means that portion of Pacific Hills Drive is not eligible for a 25-mile-per-hour stencil. Now, on the top right, or the right portion of this exhibit, is Ramani Drive. Ramani Drive is a residential street, and it is eligible for 25-mile-per-hour stencils. However, because the city is transitioning to signage instead of stencils, we would recommend installing 25-mile-per-hour posted speed limit signs in lieu of the stencils if warranted or if desired. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm open to any questions that city staff or the commissioners or police services have.
So just to clarify, the traffic committee in 2019 decided that where there was a collector street involved, a yield sign would be installed. It would be appropriate.
I think the criteria that they used was a collector and a collector intersection. And that was the only criteria that they applied for yield signs. When it is a residential and a collector intersection, they did not approve that intersection location.
And none of these locations involve 2 collector streets at the intersection.
Yes, that's correct.
Could you scroll back to page 13 for the street view?
Here?
Yeah. The bottom right photo. So that landscaping, that's what we would ask them, or that's what they have been asked to trim in the past, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, it's probably different just being there physically present, but it almost seems like even if they trimmed it back, it still would be hard to see because the way the street curves around, it wouldn't matter how much trimming you do. Is that correct? Just looking at this photo.
I took this photo recently. I think it was last week. So that's a pretty accurate photo of what it looked like out there today, unless something occurred from last week till today. But there is, I believe, some merit to increasing the visibility. The other option, of course, is to have the car pull forward more so they can increase their visibility, but there's a limit to that because at some point the hood of the car would be in the middle of the intersection. So there is some flexibility, I guess. If you move your car forward, it'll increase your visibility. But I took the picture where we traditionally design the standard plan, which is 10 feet back from the extended curb line. But this particular landscape area, it's in front of the front yard of the resident's home. You could tell they spent a lot of money on it. I think they're using it to screen their front yard from the street. So there is a value for the height of the landscape from a homeowner's perspective. But then we have that challenge of the roadway curving to the inside, which is potentially or partially limiting the visibility when a vehicle is exiting out of the intersection.
Can I ask a quick question on this? Because when I'm looking at the sight line and visibility, and I guess in question would be coming out of Morrow to turn right, the visibility on oncoming traffic seems to be a little more wide open. What we're not having visibility to is, I guess, is it egress when you're going onto the same row, which you'd be more concerned with the visibility on the left because of that lane, I'm thinking, right? So,
correct.
So it would seem that the visibility, you have more visibility towards that, what would be, I mean, if you're going to divide it into lanes, the oncoming lane.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct.
I guess it's more of a commentary than anything else. Sorry. And I guess Deputy Dixon, if you're available.
Yes.
Do you get many reports to come and I guess patrol the area for traffic in around there? What's kind of the history as far as the sheriff's department?
Back in 2018, I think it was, or something, there were a bunch of requests for enhancements to go on and complaints about people that were traveling through the neighborhood at high rates of speed and whatnot. So we went out there over a 2-day period and did enforcement in the neighborhood. And I think 95% of the sites were the residents inside of Pacific Hills that we cited, residents that live in Pacific Hills. I think there was 1 or 2 sites that were issued out of, I think, 22 sites or 24 sites that were actually issued over that 2 days. Only 2 went to people that didn't live in the neighborhood.
And were all those sites were all for speed?
No,
or
speed, driving over the double yellow lines, cutting curve. You know, they would cut the hard 90s and drive on the opposite side of the roadway. They would, I think we got 1 or 2 for speeding. The majority of them were for, people cutting all of the corners short and driving over the double yellow lines.
And in the first 2 requests, it really kind of looks like it doesn't meet that first requirement of collectors at all, right? Or none of them meet the criteria of collector, and it would almost, and the visibility seems to be, sufficient as far as, it's limited because of that, the cul-de-sac and the other street. So I'm not seeing on those first 2. I'm not seeing meeting the requirements for a yield sign based on precedent.
I
And
have one more comment. I forgot to
Yeah.
read that I did receive one resident comment. I forgot to read it out loud. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read this out loud really quickly. Are you guys able to see this email in front of you? Okay. So this is the only comment that I received when we sent out the postcard notification to each one of the 4 locations. Dear members of the board, I'm writing in regard to the very urgent need for the proposal of the yield sign and striping on Ramani at Alado Drive. I am an original resident at this address and as such have lived in Mission Viejo since 1992. I love our city, but believe we must do all we can to keep our neighbors safe as well as property values high. After watching traffic volume become increasing more dangerous at this interchange for a number of years due to high school traffic volume, now what has happened is that streets between La Paz and Felipe have been listed by the traffic app Waze as a shortcut. This makes the entire street overrun with cars who speed through our neighborhood with no care or concern for children, the numerous dog walkers, let alone the people trying to safely navigate their own street. We ask that you please provide necessary improvements to slow down people in our block. Thank you for your consideration, Jan and Michael. So that was the only comment that I received.
So she seems to suggest that it's during or around school hours when school gets out that you get a lot of the offenders. Deputy Dixon, is there is that area patrolled more or less after school hours or when school is getting out? Just sort of adding to the history that Commissioner Molinari was asking about.
Primarily, we work the intersection over at Pacific Hills and La Paz. That's where the majority of the traffic for everybody coming to school is either coming westbound on La Paz and they're making the right turn in. We'll probably get, a few hundred cars that'll come through Pacific Hills. Very few are cutting through from Oso to get over to the high school. They'll take Marguerite or they'll come down Felipe or Olympiad and come down La Paz to enter in. The school has a traffic management plan, and you can't make a right turn off of La Paz onto Veterans Way from 8:15 to 8:45 in the morning. So the majority of the people that are coming in are either coming westbound on La Paz and turning into the school parking lot entrance on La Paz, or they're coming in and making the left turn off of eastbound La Paz to go in Veterans Way. And then it will back up a little bit on Pacific Hills. But we watch it, and it's no worse than what La Paz is backing up in the left turn pocket to eastbound La Paz to go onto Veterans Way.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that any of the locations merit the yield signs either. My main concern was for location 3 in that area where the landscaping could be trimmed back, but I think Commissioner Molinari brought up a valid point that traffic coming from that direction you would be able to see, notwithstanding whatever landscaping might be blocking your sight. And I think the average driver would pull up a bit to see who's coming through that street. So I don't see anything compelling that would necessitate the yield signs in any of these locations.
we can't hear you.
There you go. Okay. So in the past, we have sent out a letter to Pacific Hills HOA requesting to trim those areas where the committee has felt it could improve visibility and to be consistent with our sight distance standard. So the city can do that on behalf of the traffic committee if the traffic committee decides to provide that recommended action.
I would be okay with that. Just follow-up reminders to them that we've given in the past.
So at this point, I'm recommending as a committee member that we deny the yield sign, location 1, 2, and 3, and we haven't spoke about 4 yet, have we, staff? Okay, Mr. Quino, did you look at spot 4?
Yeah, we touched upon it briefly. I'm not seeing anything here either. I mean, as far as the lines of sight, it seems the visibility is pretty good.
Yeah.
And again, it's the residential street, so.
Then I would add 4 to that. So I'm recommending that we deny the 4 yield signs as well as the paint markers for yielding at these locations. However, if the city could write a letter to the homeowners association to, maintain landscape to help with visibility.
I concur with that.
Okay, I just want to clarify. So, traffic committee recommends denial of the 4 yield sign locations and denial of the pavement marking requests at the 2 locations, and recommending to write a letter to the Pacific Hills, the HOA board, to trim the landscaping to maintain visibility consistent with our standard plan. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, sounds good. I'll stop sharing my screen.
But in regards to the excuse me, the stencils, because the city is moving away from stencils, I think it automatically denies that request. And as far as street signs, there's already those 2 markers that are located there at Mariano, I believe, and Pacific Crest and over there, correct?
Let me pull up the exhibit. I created an exhibit for that request. So here you go. So yeah, for Pacific Hills Drive, there are existing 25-mile-per-hour speed limit signs. One is at Marino, right when you're entering Pacific Hills Drive at that intersection. There's another 25-mile-per-hour speed limit sign. I believe it's Pacific Heights at the entrance of Pacific Heights right there. For the other street, Ramani, that street does not have 25-mile-per-hour speed limit signs posted. But they did request for stencils here.
Yeah, there's no request for signs, and I would deny the stencils and leave it at that.
Okay. Do I get a
Commissioner Quino, your thoughts on?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Okay.
Side question about the reduction of stenciling, just for my own education. When we say we're proactively reducing that and moving away from it, does that mean the city's doing like an audit of everywhere that there's stenciling and then painting over it and putting in a sign?
No. What we're doing is when we resurface the street, whether it's an arterial street or a residential street, we're supposed to paint the pre-existing pavement stencil on it. So as we are resurfacing the streets for the entire city, we have a program. It's a 7-year cycle program, or 6 or 7 year. When we repave the street, we just don't repaint the stencil on the ground. But we always make sure that at a minimum, there's a sign there, so it's not completely gone. There's still a sign that'll remind drivers of the speed limit or a stop sign or whatever, but we're limiting the amount of pavement stencils that are required versus optional. So we're removing the optional ones slowly as we're resurfacing the roadway.
I see. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So just to recap, deny the yield signs, all 4 locations, deny the pavement stencils at both two locations, and then write a letter to the HOA for the landscape trimming for, I believe it's locations 3 and locations 4. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. That concludes my item, and I'll stop sharing my screen so Brett can do the next item. There you go.
All right. Then I guess it is my turn. All right, so you should be seeing a copy of our agenda right now. And there is our exhibit. Are we looking good? All right. So this request is very similar to the previous one, although it is only for a single intersection, and there are no associated roadway stencils for it. Well, except for the yield line marking, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So the request is for a yield sign on Cordova Canyon at Ayamonte. This street is located along Marguerite Parkway between Crown Valley and Felipe. On the eastern side, you can see we have a orange dotted circle showing the location of the intersection. So here is the request that was made is for a yield sign with the associated limit line marking at the bottom of the hill on Cordova Canyon where it tees into Ayamonte. In our previous item, we had discussed sight distances at the intersection. At this intersection, when you look to the left, you have a sight distance of about 167 feet. And when you look to the right, you have about 155 foot distance of visibility there. Our standard has always been 280 feet for turning into a residential street or local street. So you can see the curvature and the intersections of the roadways here do limit the amount of visibility for vehicles that are trying to enter Ayamonte from the end of Cordova Canyon there. And hence the request for the yield sign and pavement markings. We also looked at the 3-year collision history at this location for 2018 through 2020. We found 0 collisions at this intersection over that time period. We also looked at posted speed limits, or I guess for this case, the speed limits that aren't posted. Cordova Canyon is a very short street. It would qualify most likely as a collector street, but given its short distance, probably about 500-600 feet in length, we do not have a speed limit posted on it. Ayamonte functions as a local residential street, and so that would qualify for a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. However, there is no existing speed limit posted. So here we have the additional details showing the pavement markings that would be installed along with the yield sign. It's the series of triangles that make the limit line. Similar to a stop bar, only it's the triangles to indicate that it is a yield condition there instead of a stop. And here we have photos of the subject intersection. This is on Cordova Canyon looking down towards Ayamonte. And this one looks back the other direction up the hill from Ayamonte towards Marguerite Parkway. This photo is when you're looking to your left from the intersection of Cordova Canyon at Ayamonte. And this is looking to your right. And then finally, these are the 2 approaches on Ayamonte looking at Cordova Canyon. So this is approaching from the north, and then this is looking north from the south direction. We do have the original request. The original request was for a stop sign. The request reads, a stop sign needs to be installed at this intersection as the traffic coming down Cordova Canyon does not stop or yield to the cross traffic on Ayamonte. Many cars park on Ayamonte, creating a blind spot and compounding the issue. Please install a stop sign at the bottom of the street, or at least a yield or cross traffic does not stop sign. Thank you. And that was from Susie Meyer. We did have some follow-up conversations where a one-way stop sign application wouldn't be justified at this location due to low traffic volumes, and so subsequently the request was modified to be just for a yield sign. So that concludes the report. We did get one follow-up resident comment again from Susie Meyer, and this is a follow-up comment that was received after the exhibits had been published on the city's website for the traffic committee. And so this follow-up comment reads, Cordova Canyon Housing Tract has 3 entrances into the neighbor, one of them being at Marguerite Parkway, Cordova Canyon. In addition to housing over 2,000 residents, there is a K-8 school, community park, and tennis courts located in the neighborhood. There is a T Street where Cordova Canyon and Ayamonte intersect that does not have any stop or yield signs on it. And people do not stop or yield to cross traffic and rarely slow down to make a turn or check for pedestrians, bicycles, or cars. The situation is compounded by cars parking along Ayamonte, which blocks some visibility of oncoming traffic. Please install a yield sign at this intersection of Cordova Canyon and Ayamonte to prevent vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian accidents. Thank you. And again, that was from Susie Meyer. So that is our report, and we can open up to commissioner comments and questions.
Do we know if anyone coming from Carl Hankey goes through Ayamonte or Cordova? Because I know there's a trail behind the housing that you can take to get to Carl Hankey. So I'm wondering if we know whether or not there's like a lot of foot traffic coming from the school, such that there'd be tons of pedestrians who are kids that we'd have to be concerned about.
My observations down there show that a lot of the kids do walk the green belt that is along that neighborhood. I didn't see much pedestrian activity on Ayamonte, although I was there right at school dismissal time, because as I was driving through the neighborhood to get to the location to park my truck and do the observations, the school was letting out. But as far as Hankey generating vehicular traffic, I wouldn't have any good way to measure that.
Yeah, from my experience, I don't think there's a lot of vehicle traffic coming in Cordova Canyon and Ayamonte to get to Carl Hankey. It's a very circuitous route to do that. There is a way to get there, but you have to, navigate through a bunch of residential streets where it's much easier to do that if you just enter off of Felipe Road and El Retiro, using arterial streets. It's much faster. So from my experience, I have not seen traffic coming in from this intersection to get to Carl Hankey.
Yeah, to back up Philip's comments, the way the Greenbelt is situated in the neighborhood is that Carl Hankey is on the backside of the Greenbelt from this intersection here at Cordova Canyon and Ayamonte. So any vehicular traffic that did enter at this location then has to go around the Greenbelt in the neighborhood to get over to the school. I think the more desirable entrances to the neighborhood for school traffic to use would primarily be Felipe, and El Retiro, and then some of that traffic may go out the other end to Crown Valley at the intersection with Hardines.
Yeah, and just looking at the map too, it wouldn't make sense to drive through that neighborhood to get to Carl Henke. So it doesn't look like intrinsically there'd be that combination of a traffic, like a bunch of cars and student pedestrians to cause an issue. So just considering all of that, I probably would not be inclined to put a yield sign here either. I did notice in the report there was a mention that there was not any signs posted for speed limits. Based on your expertise, would that make any difference if we had speed limit signs posted?
Well, okay, there's two parts to this. Let's address Ayamonte first. That's the easy one. Is that already qualifies for a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit because it is a local residential street. And so it's a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit is enforceable today, so we can put up the speed limit signs and not make any regulatory changes out there, so that would be relatively easy. Cordova Canyon is a bit of a different story because it acts as a collector street, and because of that, we would have to do engineering and traffic study to establish a speed limit on it before we could post it and have it be enforceable. And as you recall, we had a small discussion prior to the meeting here about when we will be updating our engineering and traffic studies. That's scheduled to occur next year. So if we were interested in doing that, maybe it would make sense to put this on the list to include for the next round when we do that next year, if that's what the committee is interested in. And if Philip has anything he'd like to contribute, I would certainly welcome that.
Yeah, there's certain collectors throughout the city that's a very short distance. So this is one of them, Cordova Canyon. The distance from Marguerite to Ayamonte, it's about less than 500 feet, is what I'm assuming. So it becomes very challenging to do an engineering and speed survey. We could do it, but by the time the car speeds up to whatever speed they want to drive, they have to slow down because there's an intersection coming up. So locations like this, it's really hard to get a speed survey. And then even if you had a speed survey, I think to request the deputies to enforce it in a short stretch, they're not going to pick up that speed that much that fast. And even when they do, they have to slow down almost immediately. So there are a couple of locations in the city that are like this. It's because of the short segment that we have not done it. But if the traffic committee would like us to add that on our list for next year when we do the citywide posted speed limit survey, we could do that as well. I'd like to hear what Deputy Dixon could say about enforcement when it's a short segment like this for speed management.
Yeah, it would be almost impossible. Finding some place to sit there to do the enforcement, number one, and it's just a short distance. The only thing that would be in our favor is a descending grade going down into Ayamonte, so speeds would pick up a little bit faster there. I think what a lot of drivers lose sight of is that when you're talking about T intersections, it doesn't relieve the driver of the responsibility as they're approaching the T intersection, if they're on the terminating sector of the roadway, to stop and look both ways and make sure that it's safe to make an entry upon the other roadway. And if they don't and they cause a traffic collision, then they're going to be at fault because they did not stop and yield the right of way to those vehicles lawfully on the roadway at the time. And even in my neighborhood that I live in, I had the same problem where people come flying in off of a major arterial onto a collector and then turn immediately because it's even shorter than Cordova Canyon. It's like maybe 80 feet from the major onto the residential street. And so people just don't slow down. They're in a hurry. They don't stop, and they've almost had some near collisions. Drivers need to pay attention when you're coming up to that terminating point of an intersection a T intersection, to take your time, stop, look around, especially there because you do have the trailhead is right across the street from that leads down into the green belt, which takes you down right over to the school and into the rest of the green belt area.
Thank you, and thank you for the info from staff too about the traffic surveys. That's really good to know. It's probably not worth it putting this street on that survey for next year, but those are all my questions. I think I'm inclined not to put a yield sign at the requested location.
And one more question for Deputy Dixon, similar to Pacific Hills. As far as citations and obviously there were no accidents, but anything in this neighborhood that you can share with us?
Oh, we get tons of complaints. There is school traffic that comes in off of Jardines, off of Crown Valley, and we get complaints of people flying down Jardines over to get into the school to drop off their kids, double parking, U-turns. We get complaints from people cutting through off of Marguerite Parkway to get over to Crown Valley, especially in the afternoon. They'll be driving westbound on Crown Valley. They'll make the right and cut through the neighborhood to get over to Cordova Canyon, and then they bypass the traffic light at Marguerite and Crown Valley, which is pretty busy in the afternoons with people heading out of town or leaving work or whatnot. So we do get a lot of complaints for the neighborhood, for speeds, for driving over the double yellow lines. We've done enforcement in there, and I can't recall a ticket that I've actually written inside of the neighborhood. Most of the ones that we write are out on Marguerite or out on Crown Valley for really high speeds.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I also would concur with Commissioner Quino and would not recommend putting that yield sign in. So.
Okay, so it sounds like we have concurrence that the committee does not want to proceed forward with the installation of the yield sign and the pavement markings. All right.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's not a good day for the yield sign business, unfortunately.
All right. So that concludes this item. The last thing on our agenda is item number 4, and that is our updates. So you see, we do have a little sub item here that in-person meetings will resume in June of this year. So let's see, I can stop sharing now. Yeah, so our June 11th meeting, which was our tentative scheduled next meeting, will be in person. We're scheduled to be here in Saddleback Room 2 at the same time, 2 p.m. on the Friday. And we're gonna see how it goes.
Yeah, and that's just to be consistent with the meeting format for City Council and Planning Commission meeting. They've all switched to in-person. We were debating to make this particular meeting in person, but I wanted to address it with the committee first before we switch to in-person meeting. Our IT staff was actually going to cancel our subscription to the Cisco WebEx software, and we had to stop them and say, "We got one more meeting, guys. Hold on," So they were able to allow us to have this meeting, and they said they're going to discontinued our software license on Monday, so we can't even use Cisco WebEx anymore. But as long as the traffic committee members are aware that we're having an in-person meeting for the June, I believe it's June 14 meeting, we wanted to make an announcement first so that we're all prepared that we're doing an in-person meeting format for the next meeting.
It is June 11th is our meeting.
Oh, June 11th, okay.
Yes.
And just to let everybody know that the in-person meeting format is a little bit different. We actually don't prepare the exhibits to be posted online prior to the meeting. We present the exhibits in person. So I just want to inform the committee members of that change. We do distribute the agenda prior to the meeting, but the actual meeting exhibits itself is not posted online because it's not in a virtual format. So I wanted to inform you guys about that change.
Will they be emailed to us though beforehand?
I think we could do that. Yeah, we haven't done that in the past, but if that would make the commissioners more comfortable with reviewing the meeting exhibits prior to the meeting, we could definitely do that. So.
If you could, yeah, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think it helps to expedite things too throughout if we have time to review.
Okay, we could do that.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest changes for us moving to virtual meetings, that all of a sudden our exhibits had to be done yet a week earlier so that they could go online. So yeah, we perfected the art of cramming these to get them done just a little bit earlier. So yeah, but I think having them available is there's a net benefit to the traffic committee. So I think this is something worthwhile to carry forward.
Yeah.
All right, so if there are any other questions about in-person meetings, we can handle those now. Otherwise, any other updates or information that the committee would like from staff?
I had one more comment. From Monday's planning commission meeting, the commission did send the request for the on-street accessible parking space for disabled back to the traffic committee. So I will, when I wrote the report, I was writing a resolution to incorporate that program, but it appears that we have to write an ordinance. So I'll bring that back to the traffic committee maybe in June or the next traffic committee meeting. I'm trying to get that ordinance straightened out. I'll coordinate with the city attorney and the planning commission attorney as well to make sure that it's solid before we present it back to you and then it's presented back to the commission. So that was the only comment that I had.
No, thank you for all your preparation and work on that too. I know it's taking on a life of its own. So.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, no, thank you. I echo the thanks. I know there was a mention at the planning commission meeting that there was a confusion created, but I think, out of confusion there is opportunity. So I welcome it. But thank you everyone for all your hard work as always. Happy Friday.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, Deputy Dixon. Appreciate helping with all those questions I have.
No problem. And I'll have to have a stand-in for me on June 11th. I will not be able to attend that meeting because my wife works that day.
Okay. All right.
Have your stand-in bring the wreath, the Christmas wreath, so we feel some consistency.
We're always in our giving mood.
We'll find a spot to hang it up over in the Saddleback room for you.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
All right, so it is now 3 o'clock, and the traffic committee is now adjourned to our June 11th meeting. We will see you then.
Have a great weekend,
Happy
everybody.
Friday.
All right,
Great
thank you,
weekend.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. And